What's going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me. I'm very excited for you to tune in to my conversation with John Dean, head coach of the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds of the OHL. Before we jump into that interview, I want to let you know that we are set to announce the TCS Live Hockey's premier coaching conference. It's going to be returning to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, from June 22nd to 24th. If you attended last year's event, then you know what a great experience it is. It is an assembly of a global community of hockey coaches, and it features some of the brightest minds in our game live on stage, on the ice, and after hours at our various social events. So if you're a member of the coaches site, can check your inbox because we're going to be sending you a notification for a members only pre-sale. We're going to save you a ton of money. And if you haven't attended before, then make sure you block off June 22nd to 24th in your calendar. You don't want to miss it. We've already started assembling our lineup of presenters, and it's going to be the best roster of coaches and leaders that we've ever brought together. So again, University of Michigan, June 22nd to June 24th. Go to thecoachesitelive.com to follow along. And with that, on to my conversation with John Dean. John, good to see you, man.
Aaron, good to see you too.
Give me your all-time Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds starting lineup. Any alumni, everybody's eligible. Go.
You really throw me right off the off the hop here, right?
Heat here, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I can go positions here, but man, you got Coffey, you got Francis, you got Thornton. Man, you're putting me on the spot here. Who am I missing? Those three off the top are obviously automatic.
Well, you got. Did you mention Gretz?
Yeah, well, Gretz.
I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He's
you know what? He's right behind me right now. If you look up top there, he's sitting up there. If I forgot that one, that would probably be an issue. The goaltending's not my specialty, but how about that? There's your four. I think those four Sioux Greyhounds beat most teams anyway.
Yeah, that's a hell of a power play. That's maybe the way we should have framed it. That'd be unbelievable.
No kidding.
You know, it's funny, man. Like I was in Kamloops on the weekend, the Thanksgiving weekend, and I me and my little guy popped in to watch the Blazers practice. Gosh, a couple days ago, and visit with Don Hay, and I'm walking around the rink there, and there's so much history. You can feel it, and I'm like,
yeah,
man, this is probably very similar to the barn in the Sioux, very similar community. Without having been there, I sense both blue collar towns, hardworking. Yeah. Like what's game day or game night like out there?
First of all, just you bringing that up, Aaron. I'll never forget when I first got offered a contract here, and my general manager Kyle Raftis kind of caught me staring into the beautiful now GFL center, and he's you just taking it all in, Diener, and I said, just taking it all in, like pretty special moment, pretty special place to be coaching, just so rich in history and tradition, and you really feel it in the rink. We have a lot of different ways of honoring the past players. We have a wall as you go right into my office. You have a wall that has every player that's played here that's also played a game in the National Hockey League,
wow.
And it's everyone stops, Aaron. Everyone stops, and it's not fancy. It's not over the top. It's just this wall that grabs your attention because it's got so much depth to it, and the names on it are pretty cool. And it runs right into my coach's office. So it's a nice reminder every day of the past, but also how lucky I am to coach just incredible talents that generally come through Sault Ste. Marie. And in terms of the community, oh man. It's super supportive, opinionated but educated opinion, right? Tim Hortons can be a fun place sometimes after a tough night, which I think is amazing. It's we joke around here quite a bit that, and this is not a knock on any other team or any other organization, but you really get the junior hockey feel here, where the community dives into it. We're one of the few things really going on in town, and people care about their players, care about their team, care about the success. But I think they also care about like how we play and the character of the group on the ice. Like our crowd cheers at the appropriate times, if that makes any sense, Aaron.
That's cool. That does.
Yeah, it's been fun, man.
I know you got to jump on the ice here for practice in a little bit. What's your, today's a Wednesday. Like what's
Yeah.
a practice day look like from a routine standpoint with you and your staff?
Sure. So we'll come in early in the morning and we'll kind of lay out the day and what that looks like. And the reason we lay it out in the morning is we do a skill session every morning for the players that are not in high school. So our players will come in at 9 a.m. They're either hopping on the ice or they're working out, and then they'll rotate. So we don't put huge groups on for skills day. Usually skills will correspond with what we want to achieve in practice that afternoon. So we try to really have that kind of seamless transition. We don't want guys working on entry skills and we work on D zone in the afternoon. We
Sure.
kind of want to try to mesh it together and really let it go seamless. We've taken a little bit of a different direction this year where I think with a younger, more inexperienced team that we're starting to pinpoint more the individual development plan and maybe a little bit more skill sessions, more unique to the individual as opposed to the team concept for that afternoon. But we'll do that and we'll go over a video as a staff and kind of go over our weekend, what we did right, what we did wrong. And we'll address the team at video at 3:00. So the whole team comes in at 2:30. High school kids show up. High school kids hop on. They do their skill session. And then during flood, we'll kind of go over team video of what we liked, what we didn't like. Usually kind of dictates what practice will be about. And we hop on for practice. And usually over the course of the day, we're kind of grabbing guys' individual meetings and individual videos. We really believe the more small touches you get here and those small interactions, one clip here, one hello, how are you here is probably the most effective. So over the course of that day, we really try to get, hey, come in here, Aaron, check out that clip of you doing something well or something not so well.
That's really interesting. And I've told this story before. I know Todd Woodcroft, when he was with the Winnipeg Jets, talked about how that, in Paul Maurice's program, that became a real focus. Like it was very intentional that, hey, like, are we making sure that, a player's not going a week and nobody's, somebody on the
Yeah.
coaching staff hasn't spoken to him? Like, how do you break that up to make sure it's not just, an obligatory, I guess, hello, it's something, hey, we're going to bring some value and
Yeah.
coach you up a little bit.
I love the word value. We use that here quite a bit. So we don't want to do stuff for the sake of doing it. Players see right through that as far as I'm concerned. And I think one is where you get value is it doesn't always have to be a hockey oriented touch.
Yeah.
It can be anything to do with the personality, the person, his family, what he's going through, school, girlfriend, you name it. But I think the value is I think when it's the three of us doing it, it's a lot better. And it's sometimes we'll have overlap, which is probably my fault. Where Diener Tails just got me, or Hughesy just got me, our other assistant coach, and you just showed me the exact same clip, and
Yeah.
we'll giggle about it. I said, well, at least we're on the same page. But I think you're bang on it. It's got to come from a sincere, genuine place. I think you also have to keep it interesting, and I do believe in showing negative clips, but I also believe in showing positive ones. So it's one of those things where, hey, check out this NHL clip, and obviously there's strategy to what you're showing in an NHL clip, but maybe it's a little more fun. Or, hey, have you talked to Hughesy? Go see him. He's got these 2 great shifts you did, and so maybe it's not me doing it, but it's my assistant coaches doing it, and I just encourage it to be really organic. But at the same time, we do keep track. Like, hey, have you talked to such and such? Have you talked to him? And but we're not keeping score. Like, oh, I got
Yeah.
Aaron 3 times this week. It's not going that way. It's just, hey, have we done our touches? How's everyone feeling? And sometimes that results in, hey, I haven't talked to this guy in 2 weeks. Neither have I. Oh boy, we've dropped the ball here. Let's get it going. I wish I could tell you I had a schedule and everything was perfectly planned, but it's not.
Well, it's funny, and like I said, we had this conversation, but I thought this was so cool. So what the Jets did is they had like a team roster with bingo dabbers and the coaches' names above it. So if you had a little bingo dabber, and so by the end of the day, they say who had who. But going back to the skill sessions, do you jump on the ice for the skill sessions?
I don't. One is if you ever saw me play, no one wants me out there. That's number one.
You
But
and me both.
I kind of do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer that the nature of my job is I have to be well, I can't be anybody's friend. Number one, I think
Yeah.
we can be close and develop a really strong relationship, but I'm hard on these guys. I hold them to a very very high standard, and I think one, it's important that they get a break from me. And two, it's important that they develop really good relationships with their D coach, with their forward coach. And those guys become the problem solvers and the people that my players can go to. They go to the staff and they feel comfortable talking to their skills guys. And quite honestly, those two guys are a lot better at it than I ever would be. So it's kind of I think advantageous in both ways.
If we asked your players what the standard is, what would they tell us?
One oh man, I'm gonna be so cliche here, Aaron, but I can't help it. We're all the same.
That's
It's
okay. That's okay.
you know, no days off. I'm a huge believer in extreme ownership. That it's always your fault you didn't succeed, including the coaching staff. And I think when you approach it that way, it means that you are absolutely going to approach every day that you are the one who's going to be the difference in your game, not anybody else. So that's the standard. You show up every day and you be the difference in your game, whether it be workout, whether it be how you approach practice. I know you have a relationship with Brendan Taylor, and he's been just such a great addition to the team this year. And one thing he talks about a lot about with us and myself, and we actually have a sign in our room, is just incremental gains, 1% every day, and that's the
Yeah.
standard. And it sounds really simple, but it's not. And all the cliches that takes are compete, work hard every day, show up, be respectful, on time, and that stuff is cliche. But I'm such a big believer that it puts you in a mindset that you're going to find success over the long run. Not immediately, not all the time, but probability says over the long run.
So I find this interesting, and to me, this really is kind of coaching at its core. So we've got the signage up in the dressing room. We've got our
Yeah,
cliches.
yeah,
Now we got to live them. We got to hold players accountable. What does that look like in your role? Like, how do you keep a pulse on that and ensure
yeah.
the players are meeting that standard on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think it's something I continue to grapple with as a coach and grow with as a coach. I truly think that if coaches tell you they have that figured out, they're probably lying to you. I think we adapt every day and try to make sure there's different ways of holding that standard. And the obvious one is we have to model it. I believe that players, I think like parenting, I'm not a parent, so I shouldn't be talking like this, but I think like parenting is kids are super smart. They know when you care, they know when you're putting the time in. And I think when we put time in as a staff and we show we care about where they're going as a player and as a human, and we model that behavior, that's our work ethic. Like that's us showing up every day. And I think it's contagious, and that allows us to hold guys accountable um, in the same way. But the other side of it is leadership groups, everything, man. I don't believe coaches coach teams. That if I'm consistently the guy who's holding the standard, we're in big trouble, big trouble. So my leadership group is the expectation. I do a lot of leadership meetings and a lot of try to get a lot of feedback from where they are. I don't want to say I barter with them, but I let them know that they are the coaches of the team, and ultimately the standard they set, will be the bar for everybody else. And it's another cliche, Aaron, but it's true. And
Oh
I think
yeah.
my relationship with my older guys is super important that way.
So this is interesting. Most coaches, at least in my experience, that have a degree in education. You have a degree in marketing, and
Yeah.
you talk about effectively you're having these leadership meetings and you're perhaps guiding, but there's a lot of salesmanship with coaching. I think that's true of leadership at
Yeah.
in all walks of life. Um, is there a correlation there? Like, have you pulled from that, your education and maybe in terms of how you frame things from a coaching perspective?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I pulled from my marketing background or not. Maybe I do subconsciously and I don't know
Yeah.
it, Aaron. I mean, there's probably a good chance. I think my education more than anything taught me about preparation, time management.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest thing, how to learn. I think it sounds funny. You go to school to learn how to learn, but I think that's been real huge for my, kind of moving up in coaching and how to absorb different information and, what to block out and what to bring in. But I do agree that there is an element of salesmanship, and not to sound fraudulent and insincere, but, kids are so smart now. They're not kids, they're young men. They're so smart that, you have to have a reason as to what you're selling. They're not just going to do it. It doesn't work that way anymore. And you know what? I respect it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, wait a second, this doesn't work. And I actually had a meeting with a player today, and the conversation was this: whatever you feel on the ice, that's right. I can't tell you how you feel. So I can tell you, oh, look how much time you have. And he's looking at me going, no, I have no time. If that's what he feels, that's what he feels. And I need that feedback as a coach. And then we can start selling. Okay, this is how you feel. This is why I don't think it's right. Let's talk about it. Let's get you to a place where you don't feel like you don't have time. And I think that's the salesmanship, is letting them have a voice and talking it through. And I'm very, very willing to change my mind. If I tell them, you can come in here, you might not like my answer, but if I like what you're saying, I have no problem going back into that room and changing my mind. And I think that goes a long way too.
I love that. That is the first time I've ever heard a coach say that. And but I can
I don't
see
know if
from a
that's good.
player's
Is that
perspective.
good or bad? Sorry,
No,
say it again.
no, but I think that's so valuable. And I imagine, like, and I've got like, I've got a son that's the same age as the players you coach. And it's like, if they come into, and he's told me that, he's like, if every conversation we have or debate, if I know that, your perspective isn't going to change, like, why are we
Sure.
talking? Like, why are
Sure.
we even having the
Exactly.
conversation? Um,
Exactly. And their perception is their reality. Whether
yeah,
we like it or not, it makes no sense for us to argue what they're feeling, right?
no, 1,000%. And you talked about earlier, just you mentioned um, knowing what to block out, and I see this in myself, with our business at the coaches site, because we're in a digital world. There's so much information and analytics. You've got, I'm sure on your desk right now, you've got a whole bunch of analytics and
Yeah.
numbers, but then there's resources like ours where you get different ideas on coaching. Like, when you talk about blocking things out, I can see how it's so easy today to try and include every bit of information, every tactic into your program. But Steve Jobs said it best. He's like, saying no is more important than saying yes. Like, knowing what to say no to doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that it maybe doesn't apply today. We've got an internal term we use. We say, we put that in the cell phone lot. Doesn't mean it's a bad
Yeah.
idea, but we're going to revisit it down the road. How do you decide what to block out and what gets into your program?
Yeah, I think another phrase we've been throwing around here quite often is, we are what we emphasize. It came up. I'm
Yeah.
sure you saw it. There was a football coach that mentioned it, and it got quickly circulated through our group. And it's something we've already talked about, but we thought it was articulated really nicely. And we are what we emphasize. And I've made a lot of mistakes as a coach, and I still think I make the mistake as a coach that we get the benefit of watching video, and I could show you a mistake every 3 seconds,
Yeah,
right?
for
And I
sure.
want to correct them all. I want to correct them all, and then we get lost in the minutia, and we forget that it is a relatively simple game. I think we teach it in a different way here in the Sioux, that I'm very proud of. But at the end of the day, we have 3 or 4 or 5 core, tendencies, efficiencies that we have to make sure we're consistently emphasizing. And if we get lost in the minutia, and I can tell you that we talked about it today, that I think we've gotten lost in the minutia a bit here. The first 4 games, first 5 games, we need to get back to, simplifying and making sure that everyone's on the same page. And so I don't know if I have a strategy for filtering, more so that I have a strategy that I know kind of are 4 or 5 things that we have to be good at. And when we're really good at those, I can start bringing in some, maybe a little more detail. I learned that from some older coaches that at the time I thought, come on, man, let's do some more stuff, and then now it's like, whoo, boy, like I better bring it down a notch, and I'm
Totally.
really confusing these kids, right?
Well, I think that's, That's so important. And I one thing I've really come to appreciate, particularly just through the show and the people we're so fortunate to talk to, is that um, keeping things simple or making the complex simple. Like
Yeah,
you
that's
can't
the
take
one.
that for granted. That's experience that takes time to refine that. And you mentioned how you teach hockey in the Sioux is different. Everybody I talked to about you that's been close to you has pointed, nobody was overly specific, but they all said like, J- John's onto something. Like he's doing it. There's a uniqueness when you talk about how you teach hockey. Like, what do you mean by that?
Um, I think it goes back to the brains of the players. So I'm maybe flip flopping on you here a bit, Aaron, but I think these
That's all right.
kids are insanely gifted. Like
Oh,
it's the stuff they do. It's like it's almost embarrassing for me, like watching the stuff that they can do. And I believe if we can, I'm going to steal your line there. If we can simplify the complex stuff, we can get these guys to do extraordinary things. And I think what we're not scared of here in the Sioux is being process oriented and taking our lumps early in the season to see it pay dividends down the road, because we feel that yeah, it's a tough system to learn, or some of the skills we're demanding are difficult, but we believe over time our group gets there, and come December, January, February, we take leaps and bounds over other teams. I'm not saying that we do. I'm not knocking anybody else, but that's
no,
the
no.
philosophy and the goal. And then I think what I've tried to do as a coach is, I think if you want to play in the National Hockey League, if you want to play pro hockey, you have to be able to make plays under stress. And we
For
talk a
sure.
lot about problem solving here. So we want to give you as many tools as possible so you can problem solve. And we want to give you that autonomy. I don't want to be the team that just says, hey, you throw it here every time, because we're not good enough to do any kind of decision making as a group.
Yeah.
So we struggle generally at the beginning of the year because we give them a lot of decision making and a lot of autonomy within our structure. And you can see the hamster wheel going because it's not natural yet. And then the second thing that we try to do is we try to build fail safes within that system. I mean, I don't know if I could try to give you an example. This might be too technical. I don't know, but we want to enter the zone always through the middle of the ice, and we have three or four different things we want to try to do: cut and drop, kick it out, and
Yeah.
you name it. And we have all take ice behind, hit the air brakes, and we have all these little things. But always built into that is, do we have a fail safe so that when that's not there, we have an easy out for ourselves? So this puck gets sent behind the net, and we start again from behind the net, and whatever that looks like. And so we try to build a system, and I don't know if it's perfect by any means, but that allows you to be super creative and have autonomy over that. But you have this little fail safe built in. It's almost like in the back of your head, like, I know I can screw this up, and I still have that one play that bails me out of this situation. That's kind of where we're trying to go.
Hey, coaches, we hear a lot these days about sport culture. And while we can all agree that things need to shift, sometimes it can feel unclear as to how to create the change needed within your own team or program. Achieving a healthy team culture doesn't have to be complicated. The solution: Hone Athletics. Hone has developed a digital platform that helps you support the other side of your athletes. I'm talking about the mental and emotional side. You receive simple, real time data on the stressors that are known to impact athlete well being and performance, as well as expert advice on how to address what you are seeing in your team trends. When you combine insight and action on the state of their collective well being, you automatically create the kind of supportive environment that allows players to trust, communicate, and most importantly, grow. Hone Athletics is offering a limited time membership discount to listeners of the Glass Note podcast. That means you're going to get 50% off. That's right, 50% off your first season with the platform. Visit honeathletics.com and request a call to discuss how they can help your team achieve new levels of performance and to deliver a quality athlete experience. That's HONE athletics.com. Let them know the Coach's Site sent you. I think that's so interesting. I know in Vancouver under Alain Vigneault when they were rolling, like putting the puck behind the net, especially with, and I don't know if it was him or if it was the Sedins that started that, but it was a real big part of their identity. And I know when I was coaching junior, we started giving the players that ability to say, hey, if there's nothing else, just kick it behind the net, and the net front guy will be first
Sure.
on it every time. It's amazing how that freedom allowed them to be so much more creative and everything else, because they maybe felt a little bit less pressure when their
Sure.
time and space was taken away. So I think that's a great insight. You talk about how you lay out the season with the expectation that you're going to improve. You're going to sort of compound that development later on in the season. When you and your staff sit down pre-training camp, like, how do you visualize the season? Like, do you map out every week, or is it a matter of saying, hey, we're going to get through camp, and then we'll sit down again and see where we're at, and go from there?
Definitely don't map out every week. I've never done that. I think we've tried before, and you end up reinventing it so much. And I'm okay with adapting and manipulating and evolving and changing week by week. But I felt like when we did the big master plan, and you'd come back to it, and it was so ridiculously changed week by week that it was fruitless to even go through that, almost a waste of time. So we try to work from the back end and from the D zone breakouts, work out and get a touch, and kind of everyone sees the whole piece of it, and then we break it down into its parts, and we try to master one at a time, and kind of make sure we're really not moving on until we've mastered the one before it. And then, of course, week by week, we generally go by, we'll go through chances for, chances against. This is where the analytics comes in. Where are we struggling? Where do we need to be better? We talk a lot about where will we find the most value, right?
Yeah.
So it's right now we're having a tough time exiting our zone, and we could work on entries, because entries aren't great right now either. But the most value is going to come out of us making sure we exit our zone, and that's going to be our focus for 2 days. And that comes back down to our previous conversation of ignoring the noise, and let's get to what really gets us paid this week. And we think breakouts is going to get us paid for the week, and that's what we're going to do today and tomorrow.
So I was going to bring, and not to, and I'm not bringing up a stat that you guys aren't aware of, but right now you lead your division. You're second in the league in goals against,
Yeah,
on the side you don't want to be on.
sure.
But I think what's interesting, you talk about exiting the zones, because I think particularly for a lot of coaches tuning into this, that when we think about goals against, we think, oh, like we gotta focus on back checking, or we gotta focus on our one-on-one play. But the fact that it's like, actually, no, when you're dissecting that, it's hey, we just gotta get the puck over our blue line, and that's the thing we gotta fix. Like, when
Sure.
you're faced with stuff like that, like, how do you go about it? I think this is the part that I miss about coaching the most. It's being in that room with your staff and saying, here's the problem, or here's what we need to solve. What's the actual problem, and how are we going to fix it? Like, how do you diagnose that as a group?
Yeah, well, the big one, obviously, we're so weaponized with statistics and stats and video that things generally pop off the page.
Yeah.
But to your point, there's a lot of things going on that we want to make sure that we ignore. I love feedback from my coaching staff, so we'll sit in here, we'll watch video. Try to watch at least a period together of every game, and then go about our business, because they have things that they need to attend to as well, and their systems that they're a part of. And then we really hash it out, and it bothers me if they don't contribute. Like, I want to get after it, and I want to argue and talk, and get to a point where it's like, yeah, you know what, that's the spot that we're going to change things. And I just listened to you talk there. It's, oh, hey, we should address D zone coverage and the goals against. And I mean, the best D zone coverage is a good forecheck and the good O zone, because on the way back, they're changing because you spent time. So do we focus on O zone because we have goals against? So you're right. We have to make these decisions as a group. And I think high value decisions for your practice are very important. And I wish I told you there was a magic formula, but we sit in there and we hash it out, and I make sure opinions are expressed, because I think the worst thing we can do is go into a practice where one coach thinks we should be working on something else and another thinks we should be working on something else. So ultimately the buck lies with me, but I've got two very talented coaches that are seeing things from a different perspective than me. And we generally get to a point where, hey, it's this and this, and let's get it done. And then we'll move on from there.
It's driving me nuts right now. So as you say that, you use the term "what's going to get us paid this week," and I was
Yeah.
having a conversation recently with sorry, my NHL coach, but he was saying he had borrowed the term from he was either at a talk or heard a podcast or something, and it was an emergency room doctor, and it
Okay.
talked about like triage, and they're like, hey, sometimes you're in the emergency room and there's nothing going on, and then sometimes there's too much going on, but they're like the way you stay focused is you triage, say what's most important right now, and they had borrowed that terminology. But I just think that language we use as coaches is so valuable in terms of not just keeping ourselves on track, but I think also aligning ourselves with our players. But I really like that what's going to get us paid this week, because I think the nature of this business that matters.
Yeah,
um,
maybe not the best line, but yeah, it works.
yeah, totally. Hey, I also thought this was interesting. So I read there was I think it was the Sioux newspaper did like a 20 questions with coach, and
Oh
you
boy.
you mentioned that you'd gotten into running
Yeah.
recently. So I
Yeah.
can relate. So when I first met my wife, so this is over 10 years ago, I used to run 2 to 3 times a week. We lived downtown Vancouver, used to do the seawall. It was great. Anybody that's
Yeah.
been there, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And but now, couple years, couple lbs later, like trying to
Life
get it
happens.
going again. So
Sure.
I've been leaning into it, but I find that as much as I'm sure it's good for my physical body, it's really good for between the years. And I'm like, how important is that, just to have those outlets for you as a coach?
I think it's changed my life. It sounds crazy, but
No,
yeah,
I
like,
believe it.
yeah, sincerely. So I started in COVID, and my girlfriend told me to get the heck out of the house, driving her bananas, and I started running, and just the impact it had on my mental health was massive. Not that I was struggling or in a bad place at the time, but how I felt after, how focused I was. Um, I thought I was more productive. I thought I was a better person. I just relaxed. And as coaches, we get super high strung. I'm super relaxed talking to you right now. Let's call a spade a spade. Those kids are going to come in here at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to be ready to go. And it's, you lose that relaxation. You want to get everything done properly, and you're intense. And I think it's important that I manage that in front of my players. And I think, to be honest, it's um, probably a fault of mine, is I can get a little too intense, and I really want to see things done the right way, and I can hold that standard maybe a little too aggressively sometimes. And the running has just brought me to this even keel spot, and
Mm.
it's gotten to the point where when I don't want to do it, um, I go and do it just because I know the value of that 25 minutes. It doesn't need to be crazy. That 25-minute run, I come back just, I can talk to you better. I can hold a
Yeah.
conversation better. I can value your opinion better. Like, you name it, man. And it's, I wish I could give you all the science behind it. I've kind of geeked out on it a bit, reading and listening to people talk about it. But like, there's a science behind it. You literally feel better. You're more productive. You have chemicals in your body that are being produced where you're like, yeah, life is good, and we'll get through this, right? So it's been life changing for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what. So last week, we had this family from Australia moving beside us, and Mike and Amy, the husband and wife, they're awesome. Our kids are pals, and Amy has shared that she used to do triathlons, and so I'm getting back into this. I'm doing call them fat man runs, and so
Nice.
I go out of the house the other day, and as I'm doing that, Amy comes out and she's got her two dogs strapped to some sort of running belt, and she looks at me in an Australian accent. She's like, "Hey, you going for a run?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Do you want to come with me?" And in my mind, I'm thinking, "Not at all." And I'm
Yeah.
like, sure, let's do it. So we get going, and she's like, wow, you got a really nice stride. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to last till about the end of the block, and then it's going to fall apart. And so we went on a run, and I've never been so humbled in my life. But and I came home, and I was dead, like just dead. I think
Yeah,
we did 10 Ks, but she was just going at a different pace. And
that's impressive.
yeah, but I'll tell you what, it was motivating, and I'm a little bit your senior, but I'm like, man, I think there's also, you talk about the psychology part. It's like, as human beings, like we need something to strive for. Like you need
For
that sort of
sure.
like, you got to get humbled a little bit and say, hey, am I gonna sit back on the couch, or are you gonna get back out there and make sure you don't get your ass handed to you again by
We
your neighbors at 3 kids?
we have a saying, and again, because I've geeked out on it a bit, and just in terms of what it looks like, and we actually have we haven't told the players that is based on on running, but there's this guy that talks about, movement comes before mood. So no one
Yeah.
feels like running. No one feels like working out. No one feels like putting 100 million% into something. So movement happens first, and then the mood follows. And we try to tell that to our players is like, we get it. Like, no one feels like going 100 miles an hour all day, every day. But you will feel good about this. 3 minutes into it, you will already feel rewarded, and you'll already feel better about yourself. You remember the old bag skates, and we don't do it anymore,
Oh
but
yeah.
you actually felt better after. Like you're
Oh,
mad at your coach, but at the end you're like, man, you know what? Put it out there, feel good. And its movement is becomes comes before mood. It's just facts.
it's funny you talk about the bag skates. I was thinking about this recently, and I'm like, my first coaching gig was in Quinnell in the BCHL, and our head coach Dale Marquette, like he played under Daryl Sutter and Mike Keenan briefly in Chicago. Like it was hard.
Yeah,
But bag skates were a strategy. They weren't like a disciplinary thing. Like, but he's like, he goes, the team sucked before, and he's like, this is the quickest way to build confidence in themselves is to make them do
yeah,
hard shit. And
yeah. It's the best way of
and
saying it.
and it worked, and and you can't do that anymore because it's wrong. But I've thought about like there's an evolution maybe we're missing with the bag skate that maybe
Do
there's
hard
a
shit.
yeah.
Do hard shit. That's the only way to build. I think you couldn't have articulated that any better. How do you give confidence to a player? Go do hard shit.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, I'll tell you what. So what's interesting, and I just doing research for this, and you played for Mike Kelly with wasn't the North Bay Battalion at the time as North Bay Centennials.
Yeah,
And Mike has spoken at our conference. He's the obviously for anybody that doesn't know, he's the assistant coach with the New York Rangers now. He's been with Gerard Gallant for a number of years, but um, he's an intense dude, and I say that as a compliment, but I sense that he probably made you guys do some hard shit back in the day. Like, how did he influence you as a coach?
the best coach I ever had.
No way.
It's yeah, it's not even close, and that's not a knock to. I hope that's doesn't
No.
insult anybody I had prior. He was so far ahead of the game, and he was very hard. Like, there was a standard, and I would not dare cross Coach Kelly's standard. Like, it just, and he had what's the word? He had a presence about him that made sure that you knew that you're not messing with that standard. Um, but he was the first guy that I felt learned the game from. Were like a couple aha moments, like, oh, his X's and O's and his style of play and his strategy was. I thought he was way ahead of what I previously had. Maybe he wasn't, but that's the way I definitely felt as he coached me. Um, I still I remember when I started coaching a decade later, I used his PK forecheck, which was probably way past its prime at that
Yeah.
point. But it's like I just everything he taught was so vivid in my brain, which to me is such a huge credit to him. Like, I hope, Aaron, when you talk to my players, they can tell you, what I'm trying to teach. So he must have done such a
Yeah.
great job at teaching that I remembered all these things a decade later. But I have a good story about his standard. Is I got there, it was my second year, his first year, and a guy by the name of Mike Cirillo played in the American League a little bit. Really good hockey player, but a blue collar guy, known for his toughness. And he came in, and he's interesting personality, fun, and he was going to be definitely assistant captain or a captain. And he was about 20 pounds overweight. And Mike, every single day, did not let him come on the ice, practice him after, and bag skate him for an hour. And Mike would bag him and bag him and bag him. And I was like, what is happening right now? And when I say bag skate, not talking about torture, none of
Yeah.
this stuff
No.
that I
Yeah.
want to get Mike in trouble here. Like, just
Yeah.
like, hey, you got to get in shape and you got to lose some weight. And it was funny what happened. The two of them became extraordinarily close, and he became an unbelievable captain. He would go to war for Mike, and Mike would go to war for him, even when he messed up. And it was some method. I couldn't tell you right now. Probably looking back, I'm sure there was conversations in between that I didn't know about. right? As a player, all I saw was my captain is getting what handed to him by our coach, and I'm never crossing this guy. And wow, his standard is high, and he doesn't care who you are. And watching the two of them grow together, I remember as a player going, man, I want that relationship with a player if I'm ever a coach. Like he's done something right here and still held the standard up here. So he was ahead of his time, man. I really believe that.
Well, I think it probably goes back to what you said earlier about, players want to know that you care about them and that you have their best interest. And I think, and that's just that case, that's sounds like that's what that player needed at that time. And that was the best way
Yeah,
to articulate to them is, hey, like, I care about you. I'm not going to let you fall short of what you're
sure.
capable of. So,
And the whole team got that message. Mike's also the only guy who ever kicked me off a bench. I was like I was a good soldier. Like I just did whatever my coach told me. And yeah, Mike kicked me off his bench one time, and he handled it with grace afterwards. But yeah, that's the only bench I've ever been thrown off of.
oh man, well, I'm just thinking like if I was a player and I was seeing the coach bag skate the player that was supposed to be the captain, I'd probably be eating celery through training camp just to make sure
Yeah,
I
no
didn't
kidding.
face that.
Yeah,
Um, Speaking of, I think some iconic coaches that have, carried a lot of weight in our sport. You work with Stan Butler in North Bay with the battalion in the OHL as an assistant coach. Um, I want to dive in a sec, but I thought this was interesting on your bio that you were in charge of hockey operations and recruiting, but specifically being in charge of the hockey operations. And you know, does that experience as a young coach is that really valuable? Because I sense you gain an appreciation that there's the X's and O's part of coaching, but when you eventually assume the head coaching role and you're running your own program, understanding that hey, like how you communicate when breakfast is to the players on the road trip matters. How you schedule the bus trip matters. Do you have snacks on the bus? How many rolls of tape are you putting out in the dressing room? Like all these little details, they're almost just as important as
yeah.
how you're forechecking.
Oh man, I joke all the time with our assistant coaches, like, and you thought we were coaching hockey, right?
Yeah,
Because
cool.
there's so many other things to do, and I think it's easy to forget how much those little things and how important they are. Yeah, I think all that stuff is designed to make sure the players have the least amount of stress as possible,
Yeah,
right? Where things are, I don't want to say babied and taken care of, but like, they're not bringing their snacks, and they've got to be on time, and they've got to be organized, and they have to know what the expectation is every day. And it's really funny you bring that up because I had a coaching staff for 4 years here, and it became clockwork. And there were some efficiencies to our rhythm, right? It's
yeah.
they knew what I wanted, I knew what they wanted. Things didn't get brought to me based on just hey, I know what he'll say here, and things got done. And I have a brand new coaching staff this year, and we're learning each other, and we're learning what the day to day looks like. And to your point, it's very important that I download and make sure that my staff knows what's expected, and then my players know what's expected, and that includes equipment managers, that includes people upstairs, and there's so many different moving parts. And I think there's a lot more to hockey than just X's and O's. I mean, you look at our conversation right now. We've talked about relationships, how to get messaging across, how to manage the day, the importance of what are we talking about now? The day to day functioning of a
Yeah.
team. It has nothing to do with like there's just so many moving parts, and I think going through that first in North York and then watching understand and how organized he was, yeah, it's a big piece of it, and players know when you're not organized and things are going by the seat of their pants. Players know.
Well, speaking of the coaching staff, so you're referring to Brendan Taylor comes over from Mississauga. You got Brent Hughes, who my understanding is you've worked with him
Yep.
before.
Yep.
Um, how did you go about? I mean, we always think of team building in the sense of you get the players together and I don't know, you do a tug of war thing or whatever. But how do you bring the staff together, not just in terms of the camaraderie, but to say, hey, like you talk about a standard, like obviously your standard of how you operate your program day to day is going to be different, not in a good or bad way, but it's just going to be different. That's obvious.
Yep.
How do you sort of onboard them into your program and say, here's what I need from you, but also here's where you got to support me.
Yeah, I think lots of touches early, similar to players. right? How you doing today? Do you feel like you know your direction today? I ask that question a lot. Like, do you feel like you've got something to do today, or have I led you in the right area? I think that's a big one early on. I also think, let's call a spade, that there's going to be some trial by fire. We're going to mess things
Yeah.
up. And we had our first road trip the other day, and we had lots of bumps and bruises on that road trip of just what the dynamic looked like between the three of us. Nothing anyone behind the scenes would know, but that we knew, right? I mean, I think the most important thing is making sure, you keep those kind of bumps away from the group and internal. Not that it was anything important, just, day-to-day stuff. But I'm a big talker. I'm sure you can tell by how much I like chatting with you here. It's
Yeah.
it's like bringing them in and where you at, how you feeling, do you understand the standard that we've talking about? Do you know your day to day? And I also think it's my responsibility to coach them as well. And that's not to say that I'm smarter or know more or anything along those lines. But hey, I need this today, and we need to do more of this. And I think eventually you find your rhythm. I think you're a fool to believe that if I just walk in on day one and say, here's your responsibilities and this is what we do, that this is just going to take care of itself. I think we find our rhythm as a group and what it looks like and how we fill our day. But they know, right back to what we always talk about, they know what I value and what I need absolutely has to get done, most bang for our buck. And then the other little things, we figure out as we go. But I do have a good story is when both those guys came up here. You want to talk about team building? Is I rent a place up here in the Sioux for the 8 months that I'm here, or the
Yeah.
9 months that I'm here, and neither of those guys had a place for the first 2 weeks.
Oh, no
So
way.
we all lived this. It felt like we were in our 20s
Sleepover.
again. It was real easy to get to know each other pretty quick. So there's no issues here. We're not shy. It's good.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So John, there's supposed to be, and I stress supposed to be, a cyclical nature to junior hockey. You're supposed to, ramp up, get good, and then you're supposed to fall back down to the basement and start
sure.
again. So that appears to apply everywhere in junior hockey except the Sioux. You guys are just in the mix every year. How does that happen?
Well, I mean, I can't talk about being in the mix every year without talking about Kyle Raftis, our general manager. I think he's just done an unbelievable job every year. I'm so excited about the talent that comes in. Again, I don't want to sound a certain way, but we feel like we have a really fun style of hockey, and you have to have a certain style of player play that brand. And I think Kyle's done such an unbelievable job of attracting really, really good talent to our community and to our team. And every year, I'm shocked at what we find in the middle rounds, the late rounds. And
Yeah.
the cool part about Rafty is when you get drafted to the Sioux, the attention to those players over the course of their development when they're not here, I think is extremely high. And they get a
That's
lot of
cool.
they get a lot of touches and they get a lot of feedback on expectations over the course of the year. And I've never walked into a training camp where Kyle's told me, "Hey, you have to look at the second rounder and the fourth rounder." Well, actually, he never has second rounders because he hasn't had to pick too many. But he never says, "Hey, you have to look at the top four rounds." He tells me about the 14th rounder. He tells me about the 11th rounder. Here's what he did this year, and I think that faith in who he's picking and style of player he's bringing in and his willingness to think outside the box that way, I think has been a huge asset for us. And two is we talk about holding a standard to our players. I think Kyle does a good job of holding his coaching staff to a very high standard. Kyle's not shy to fairly challenge us in a I don't want to say aggressive way, but in a way that like he pushes me, like even when I might be starting to slip and go, man, I'm not sure we're there yet. And he's like, no, we're gonna be there. We're gonna get there, and here's why, and here's how, and let's figure this out together. So he pulls me up too sometimes when I might be struggling, and I just think that there's an expectation to win, and when you have that, it's tough to overcome. Meaning it's tough to go the other way. Like the players in here don't know why we're not in first place. Like they just don't. Like they can't figure it out. And that's because it's been created here that you expect to win, and when you don't, you're upset about it, and we'll find a way to do it. It's a mentality, but I mean, it can't go unsaid that a lot of it has to do with players that are being brought in and the general manager. I wish I could take credit when we have good seasons. That, oh yeah, I just, I turned this thing around. But at the end of the day, good players make coaches look good. Aaron, it's a fact. So I've been blessed with talent here.
Well, I have to think. So I was looking at this is amazing. And without having I guess the time to dive into it deeper, I think this is really unique I would challenge any junior college organization to match this. So I'm just going to read off some names here. And
Yeah.
this blew my mind. Terry Crisp, Sheldon Keefe, Craig Hartsburg, Ted Nolan, John Van Beesbrook, Danny Lambert, Dave Cameron, Dan Flynn. Like, talk about a history of great coaches coming through a program. I don't know which organizations could match that. I'd have to think. I mean, you got 2 feet and a heartbeat, John. You're a human being. That has to, when you're driving into the rink each day, you gotta feel a little bit of pressure, but in a good way. And do any of those coaches, have you chatted with any of them or gotten any advice or feedback from them?
Yeah, I mean, Drew Bannister was here before me too.
Yeah.
Sheldon Keefe was great when I first started out, making sure he was available if I needed anything. And I'm not big on reaching out. I try hate to say it, I try to stay in my lane and do my thing. But no, there is a pressure, and it's definitely something that's embraced. I feel like I need to live up to the standard before me in the winning seasons. And to be honest, is I appreciate being lumped in with those guys, but I feel like we've been short over my 4 years here, and I want to get over that hump, and that's my responsibility to do so. And yeah, it's when I see the names and I see Coach of the Year in here, man, it gets me going, Aaron. Like it's a pressure that I really like, and it forces me to try to better myself and be a better coach. And I think I told you this before. I'm huge on extreme ownership. That it's always my fault. I think it's a great way to live, because if you think it's someone else's fault, what do you do in the morning? If it's out of your control and it's someone else's fault, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? And so the extreme ownership side of me is like, let's figure this out, because the guys before me did, and there's a standard that's been set here. And I really like the way you segued into that, because it is about the standard, and that's why there is success in Sault Ste. Marie. And the expectation is that I follow through on that, and that's the plan.
Hey man, leadership matters. It just does. And
Yeah.
you talk about extreme ownership. I wonder any relevance to Jocko Willick
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, and so
Oh
on
yeah.
that note, anything else? I know, and I love his podcast and hearing him talk. Anybody else? Any books that have had an influence on you as a coach or people?
Jocko Willnick's been massive, I think, for me. I read that book, and that's another one that was. Yeah, I read a lot of books, and I'm not going to be great at rhyming them all off, but only a few really grab you, and Jocko Willnick's really grabbed me, because you can't blame anybody but yourself, and the logic is so sound. It's just like, if I woke up in the morning and I thought I couldn't be successful at my job unless Aaron was there to help me, man, what a brutal feeling.
Yeah,
Or if you're a player and you show up and, oh well, if I don't have the proper centerman, and it forces you, this extreme ownership idea forces you to look at, what could I have done differently. And I look back, and like, if our players don't perform, it's you like to go, oh well, he can't do it. It's like, no, did I articulate it properly? Did I teach it properly? Is there a different drill we can use? Is there a different meeting setup we can use? The other guy that hit me a little bit, I've gotten off him a little bit lately, is John Gordon. And John Gordon's done a
yeah,
lot of football,
yeah.
right? Goes to a lot of colleges, and he's on the positivity train.
Energy
And
bus.
energy bus.
Yeah,
Don't be an energy vampire, right? Don't suck the energy
totally.
out of the
Yeah.
room. And so he's kind of brought that positivity, which I think is great. And then my last one that really has had an impact on me lately, I forget his name, I apologize, but the quarterback. I'm not a football guy, of course, but it was a sports psychologist for one of the major quarterbacks in the NFL, and he
Oh,
talks.
oh, I know exactly. He was with Russell Wilson. He passed away from cancer
Yes,
last year.
correct. He passed recently. Yes.
Yeah, and it's don't say stupid shit out loud.
Don't say stupid shit a lot. I did a whole presentation on this guy,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
it was like, it amplifies when you say negative things that you're thinking, how much it amplifies the actual chance of it happening.
Trevor Moawad.
And he actually, what's his name? Sorry,
Trevor Moawad, I believe.
Trevor Moawad. Yeah, recently passed.
Yeah.
God rest his soul. But it's his whole concept is, don't say negative things out loud. That was all they talked about, and think neutral, which I thought was super cool. So for guys like me who are, you have these real highs and lows, and it's like all you need to do as a player and as a coach, think neutral. What happened wasn't bad. What happened wasn't good. It just happened. And what is your next step out of this? And I
Love it.
actually think the think neutral thing is better for teams that are doing well, because the teams that are doing well think
Yeah.
everything's going great,
Eliminates
right?
complacency. Yeah.
Yeah. So those three have been I've kind of tried to use a mismatch of those guys.
Well, I've been waiting to dive into this one. I'll make the recommendation in case you haven't read it. I literally turned the first page last night. Was The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh, and it's I got tangled in it. It's awesome.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
I listen real quick here because I know we got to get you out there to watch skill development practice. We
No
touched
problem.
on Stan Butler. Stan spoken at our event and has just had a remarkable career in junior hockey. What
Yeah.
what do you do today that you stole from Stan?
Uh, I wish I could say I was as organized as Stan. I'm not. But man, to your point about the details of the day to day, he made me a way better coach that way in terms of my organizing my day and organizing what a practice should look like and how that should filter through. I think that's been key. But when we talked earlier about value, and what we do, sorry,
All right.
and what we do, what we emphasize is what we're going to get. I think he just inherently knew that, and he had his 4 or 5 core values that he just would not steer away from. And when I say that, I don't say that in a negative way. And he found so much success making sure his team was good at those 4 or 5 things. So what my 4 or 5 things are, it doesn't matter, right? We all have, hockey's philosophical. I
Yeah.
believe in one style. He believes in one style. But he hammered those 4 or 5 things, and were his teams ever good at it? And I think early on in my career, before I got to Stan, I tried to be perfect at everything and every little detail and correct every mistake. And it's like, just relax. If you find value in these 4 or 5 things on a consistent basis, we're going to be okay. And you can keep adding to that as you go. That's probably my biggest Stan takeaway for sure.
So, hey, John, last one here, and we don't let anybody
Yeah.
come on the show that's played minor pro hockey in Texas without getting a good story out of them, and just anybody that I see that on their resume that's played in the old, I think the original one was the Western States Hockey League, and then you
Yeah, the
play in the
Whipple.
Central. If you play in those leagues, you love hockey. Like
Oh,
that's a
man.
badge of honor. So over to you. What do you got?
Oh, man. I can think. I'm trying to think of something I can say on your podcast. That's what I got. It was one is, you're right. It's, if you play in that league, it's you love hockey. The one thing I'll say about that league, I don't want to reference Don Cherry here, but he talked about just the depth of hockey talent in Canada. There was good players in that league, man.
Yeah.
And then and I, for me, we used to say, when you leave the Central Hockey League, you quit, you don't retire, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of league it was. But man, there was good players, and the depth of hockey in Canada was always great. But I'll tell you, not about Texas, but I'll tell you a story about the miners and how you would find a way to survive. How about that?
Yeah.
Is you used to get paid your expenses for travel, right? And the way the Central Hockey League was back then, it was a 22-week season, so you weren't making a lot of bucks. So to your point, you had to love it, but you had to find ways to survive. So you'd get paid for whatever it cost you to get there, and then they'd give you the same amount of money for when you went back. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So on the way there, it's a 24-hour drive. We'd stop at 4 hotels, make sure it was a nice hotel, eat a nice dinner, and you'd give a real fat, hey, here's here's what it cost me to get here. Can I please be reimbursed? And they reimbursed you happily. They were great about it. And on the way back, they had to give you the same money. So you get this nice lump sum on the way back. But of course, the two of you would pair up and we go straight home 24 hours. You wouldn't stop anywhere and you wouldn't stay in a hotel. And that's how you survived. You made a couple extra bucks trying to play minor pro hockey and keep your
Oh
keep your
man.
life going. So that was that's how I look. It's not to mock minor hockey, man. I loved it so much. Texas was unbelievable state, amazing people. They thought we were football on ice. That's what they used to say. I came to watch football on ice, and it was 3 great years.
Oh man, I love it. I love it. Love the creativity. I feel like everybody's got a story like that and how you make it work. Hey John, I'm stoked to watch the Greyhounds trend upwards this year, and I just know again through our your assistant coach and my pal Brandon Taylor that you guys got something cool going on there. So best of luck to you and the Greyhounds this year, and we appreciate you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
The Glass and Out podcast is a The Coaches Site production.